Hey everybody, it's Chris, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Ron Hunninghake, MD, from the Riordan Clinic. And he's the Chief Medical Officer there. And if you don't know Riordan, they're a not-for-profit research facility, clinical laboratory, and functional medicine practice. Dr. Ron has been practicing functional medicine for 30 years. He's an international expert on IV vitamin C. At the Riordan Clinic, Dr. Ron has overseen over 75,000 administrations of IV vitamin C. So he knows a little bit about IV vitamin C. And I'm really excited to talk to Dr. Ron because I had IV vitamin C treatments back in 2004. So this will be a really fun conversation. And Dr. Ron, thanks so much for taking the time.
You're welcome, Chris. Yeah, my pleasure.
So let's talk about vitamin C. How did you're an MD. I'm assuming you were a traditionally trained MD, and at some point in your career, you took a little bit of a detour. How did that happen?
Well, even from the very beginning, I was big into exercise. I was a vegetarian at the time. I was a runner, and I just was interested in health. And so I went to medical school, and I kept thinking, when are they going to talk about health? And they never did. It was just basically disease and pharmacology, and they did do chemistry, biochemistry, physiology, but really I didn't get to use it in conventional practice. I was a family physician for 10 years, and I was also the medical director of a nursing home, and I really saw way too many elderly people on polypharmacy, and I just thought there's got to be a better way to deal with chronic illness. And so I had met Dr. Riordan. I did my intern. I'm a Kansas University graduate of medical school, and then I met Dr. Riordan while I was doing my internship in Wichita. And so I just happened to run into him again at another lecture, and he invited me for lunch, and the rest is history.
So now I've got to correct myself because I've been calling it Riordan for like ever.
Well, a lot of people do
Riordan, yeah, okay.
or Riordan, and so it's Riordan is fine. Riordan is, most people will understand that.
Yeah. Well, it's Riordan from here on out of my mouth. So will you? So that's really interesting. So you were already a health and fitness enthusiast. Went to med school. Did they talk about nutrition at all?
Yes, we had 3 hours of training. That means that one afternoon for about 2.5 hours, we talked about scurvy and beriberi, and they said, but don't worry, you won't see these in your practice.
Wow. So will you talk about Dr. Riordan a little bit, about his legacy and his history and the lunch and all that?
So this facility that I'm at, I encourage everyone to log on to riordanclinic.org and take a look at a very amazing facility. It's 8 geodesic domes and a pyramid. So Dr. Riordan was considered eccentric, as most medical mavericks are. He wrote a trilogy called Medical Mavericks. He wrote it because he made a number of discoveries here that he thought the medical world would be excited about, and instead he was shunned. And so he went back, being a history buff, medical history buff, went back and found out that most pioneers in the field of medicine had the same experience. Anyone that comes along with a different paradigm of care, first of all, is laughed at. Second of all, they're violently opposed. And then third, when it finally begins to be accepted, they kind of say, well, we kind of knew that all along. You didn't have the proof yet. So we thought it was weird. But now we're very glad that we discovered it, sort of thing. And so that's actually what's happening with IV vitamin C now as we speak. We'll get to the discussion about sepsis using vitamin C intravenously for a potentially fatal illness called septic shock. And that is taking the medical world by storm. And one of the doctors here in Wichita, who's a good friend of the clinic, she teaches at the medical school here, they were raving about how great it works for septic shock. And she said, you guys, they've been doing it for 30 years at the Riordan Clinic. And it's kind of like, they have, because as you know, humans are slightly prone to bias.
Yes,
and
they are.
especially in the medical field. And the word vitamin seems to trigger a lot of negative bias type thinking. And frankly, I would rather we call it IV ascorbate or something different. But the little mnemonic IVC, which just kind of rolls off the tongue, is what has stuck. And so we'll probably stay with that. But I always have to tell people it's about the molecule ascorbate, what a unique molecule that is, and why giving higher doses is really just simply we're now doing what all the animals do. They make their own vitamin C in higher doses when they're sick.
So I really am excited to get into the science of the vitamin C molecule. But before we do, it's interesting that we're about to talk about vitamin C, and you brought up scurvy. And I couldn't help but think about James Lind, who was one of the first physicians to discover vitamin C. And I don't remember the year, maybe the 1700s, but it took like 200 years before they accepted it as the cure for scurvy.
That's right. That's right. And then I think it was when the British faced the Spanish Armada, the reason they won is because they had the lime. They had the lime juice, and their sailors were not so terribly tired because they were sitting out there before they started fighting, and all the Spanish naval people got sick, and they were weak, and they couldn't fight. And so the undermanned British Navy won because they had lime juice.
Wow.
That's simple.
And that's, of course, why, where the expression limeys came from.
Right, correct.
So let's talk about the vitamin C, ascorbate, the molecule, like what it does in the body. Why is it so special?
Well, there's a Dr. Stone that wrote a book called The Healing Factor all the way back in 1976. And he, in that book, goes so far as to say that human life on the planet, and I mean on Earth especially, could not have survived without vitamin C. And the vitamin C molecule, when I see cancer patients or chronically ill patients, I typically show them the glucose molecule and the oxidized vitamin C molecule. They're incredibly similar. And so where it really comes down to, and what's been really fun to discover, is that the real key to health is mitochondrial functioning. And the mitochondria, for the listeners, probably most of your listeners already know about it, is it's like the intracellular biome. These are bacteria that millions and millions of years ago, one little bacteria got eaten by a bigger one, phagocytized, and instead of being digested, it formed a symbiotic relationship, and it formed a second membrane around it. So mitochondria, which make up 10% of the body weight, are a major. They are the source of our energy, and there's a very important distinction that happens when the prokaryotic cells, which were the original single-cell organisms, learn to be able to make ATP energy with mitochondria. There was a 19-fold increase in the energy efficiency, and it really brought about the whole era of multicellular organisms.
So I remember kind of going deep diving on vitamin C with Dr. Thomas Levy and then Robert Cathcart and Linus Pauling, just all of these guys that were out there talking about it. And I became very fascinated with it years back as it pertains to health. And correct, I would love to know your opinion on this. And from what I've read, it's true, but I want to know what you think. That there's a phenomenon in the body that the sicker you are, the more vitamin C you'll absorb and use. Is that correct?
Yes, that is. And that's Dr. Robert Cathcart's research. Basically, when you take vitamin C as a powder or as capsules, you only absorb about 30% of it. There are transporters in your gut that have to transport it across the gut membrane. But the sicker you are, the more actively these transporters work. And that's why Cathcart found he was working at, I think, UCLA, he was a successful orthopedic doctor, made all of his money designing a special hip replacement. And being independently wealthy, he got bored, and so he went back and started taking care of college students. And when they would come in with mono, sicker than could be, he would just say, okay, instead of taking 1 or 2 grams a day, he would say, I want you to start out with 1 or 2 grams every hour and keep escalating your dose until you start to feel better or until you get diarrhea. Well, the average listener probably, and it varies a lot from one person to another, but if they were to do that little experiment, let's just say take 1 gram every hour, maybe about 4 hours or 5 hours into it, they would have to be running to the bathroom. Cathcart could get his very sick mono patients, they could take up to 10 every hour for like 12 hours, 120 grams, and even more sometimes. And so, so this pointed to a very interesting phenomenon, and that's when he understood that Dr. Stone had basically said the same thing, that when animals, and if you take the goat is the champion. The goat can make 12,000 a day, 10 or 12,000 a day, but if it's sick, it can make 100,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day.
Wow.
And that's equivalent to what we are giving to very sick cancer patients, for instance, or infectious disease patients. We give it as an infusion because to sit there and take tablets 10 every hour, it's not necessary if you have access to IV vitamin C.
So I've done this, and I wrote a long article about it years ago after investigating the high-dose oral protocol and Cathcart, and just really getting excited about the whole thing. And I keep ascorbic acid powder, on hand for sort of in case of emergencies, and sometimes I travel with it as well. And I've found on many occasions if I start to feel run down and I jump right on that high-dose protocol, that I can knock something out. Or prevent it from fully developing into what I feel is coming. So I just love that so much. And I'm often asked by cancer patients who are, thinking about vitamin C IV therapy, how much do I take? How many times a week should I go? I mean, does that vary for different people, or is there a...
Yeah, I sure wish there was an easy answer to that, and there's not. Yeah, a lot of times I'll tell people it's how much your bowels will let you take, but people have they have things to do in their life besides sit around and take vitamin C, especially if they're not all that sick. If you're sick, you're very motivated to take vitamin C. The common cold, which is really a misnomer because a really bad cold, you get pretty darn sick. You could probably easily take 40 to 60 grams a day. And all these studies that said, well, vitamin C doesn't work for the common cold, they all were using, like 500 milligrams 3 times a day.
Yeah,
and
not enough to make a difference.
Not enough. Dr. Tom Levy, who is my lecture partner, he and I are literally lecturing around the globe these days, and we could talk about all that too, which is really fascinating because this is a global phenomenon now. The word is out, as Dr. Levy even wrote a nice little essay called "The Genie's Out of the Bottle," and he doesn't think we're going to put it back in because we are in such a huge tsunami of chronic illness that is now hitting the globe. I just got back from India. I was invited to teach 80 doctors to use IV vitamin C, and they are having in the next 10 years. Their incidence of diabetes is going to increase 150%. They opened a free clinic where they're going to be giving IV vitamin C, and the first 11 patients we saw were advanced cancer patients. And it just goes on and on. The American medical system, which we used to think was such a great system, is now 54th in the world. We are number 1 in cost, so we do hold that status. Yeah,
gold medal.
And so number 1, but the Chinese are using it a lot. The Chinese, it is socialized medicine, but they are not controlled by the pharmaceutical industry, and they are looking for result-oriented therapies, and this is why they're so interested in vitamin C. Dr. Levy just got back from speaking over there several months ago. Japan, where I've been 9 times, they've got over 900 doctors now in an IBC type organization. and they are really active. We just, normally when we have our orthomolecular conferences, we'll have maybe 150, 250 participants. There were 850 participants 2 months ago in the Tokyo Orthomolecular Symposium. So anyway, I think it's a worldwide phenomenon. Things are starting to happen. But to go back to your question, it's a very individualized thing as to how much vitamin C you're going to need, and it depends upon not only what disease you've got, but like if you're talking about cancer, the early stage of cancer may not need as much as the late stage. The late stage may need a higher dose. And then we're also in the process now of looking into continuous infusion. We have an inventor who has developed a pump that you can wear around your arm, and it will give continuous infusion of intravenous vitamin C over a 2-day period. And we think this goes back to the original research that was done by Linus Pauling and Ewan Cameron. Everyone thinks they gave 10,000 as an IV drip over 20 minutes, which would be easy to do. But the answer is these people were hospitalized, and so they were given their 10 grams over a 24-hour period. It was continuous infusion. And Pauling and Cameron had, on the average, 4 to 5-fold increase in survival on just 10 grams. And they had a number of people that survived 20 times what the controls did.
And their drip, you're saying, was the 24-hour drip, the Pauling and Cameron drip?
Correct. Now, we're not saying we're going to give up the bolus, the big dose, but what we think would be even, see, the whole theory of chemo resistance is where you give chemo or you give high-dose vitamin C and it kills the most susceptible cancer cells. Well, who's left over? The strong ones. And so you're basically selecting for resistant strains of cancer. But if we gave the bolus and then sent you home for a couple of days, or you went to work or you went to exercise or whatever you wanted to do, and you had this inconspicuous pump, a bladder pump, no electrical parts, hooked up into your vein using a comfortable catheter, you could continue. In a sense, we're replicating what the animals can do, what the goat can do. We can keep patients in the 1 molar range. Usually when you're taking oral vitamin C, you can never get above the 0.01 molar range. So what we're talking about is the 100 times the amount of what you could get if you were just taking it orally. Even if you were taking it to bowel saturation, you still, there's been research done at NIH which basically says you can't go above 0.2 or 0.22 molar. But you can with liposomal, and this is where Dr. Levy gets interested in it. You can double or triple your blood levels with liposomal vitamin C. And for those people who can't get to IV vitamin C, frequent dosing with liposomal may be a reasonable alternative. Not nearly as good as IV vitamin C, but something that could be beneficial to people. And even oral dosing, Dr. Abram Hoffer, who was another orthomolecular giant, he had a very successful study where he was giving 20 to 30 grams a day of just vitamin C ascorbate, along with a number of other nutrients. And he had a very high success rate. So I think there are, and just your website, the work that you've done and the people you've worked with demonstrate that it's not just a question of vitamin C. It just turns out that vitamin C is a very powerful treatment. But even Dr. Riordan said you never want to base your therapy on vitamin C alone. We call it the perfect adjunctive therapy. And we have a book coming out hopefully in the next couple months that is, right now we're thinking of calling it the golden bullet, redefining optimal cancer care. And it's an adjunctive therapy. And my whole idea, I think vitamin C could be very powerful by itself, but there are so many cancer patients suffering from the side effects of their chemo. The chemo's not working, and there are a number of places around the country like University of Iowa, Cornell, Jefferson College. They're doing IV vitamin C plus chemo, and they're able to reduce the dose and they're able to get better outcomes with fewer side effects, and it's a win-win situation. So Dr. Riordan was a big believer in let's join hands. We don't have to fight one another. Let's get the best of all possible worlds, because every cancer situation is so different. I'm not a big fan of chemotherapy, but you know, if you're one of these patients that all of a sudden discovers they have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and I saw you on your website, you've had some successful people with that, but nevertheless, that is a very, very life-threatening situation, and it should be really all hands on deck and use whatever resources you can to get back in on top of that thing.
I totally agree, because there's been as critical as I have been of the cancer industry and of the ineffectiveness of treatments and the fact that many patients are rushed in and misled and expect outcomes that are not realistic. You know, I could suck up this whole interview just talking about that, but I won't. I also agree that we need to work together, because everyone's different. Some people, you know, really want to do conventional treatment. They feel comfortable with it. They trust their doctor, and that's great. But my mission is really just to help educate people that, hey, there's so much more you can do, right? You don't have to say no to those treatments. You should be educated. You should know what you're getting into. But if you say yes, guess what? There's so much you can do to help yourself, your diet and your lifestyle, integrative treatments like IV vitamin C, your attitude and stress, so much. So that's why I love what you're saying and what you're talking about, because it's so important. We don't have to fight with each other, right? Alternative versus conventional. We really can work together, and it just gets me so excited. I was so excited to hear you talking about everything that's happening around the world with vitamin C. I mean, that is so cool. So will you explain how vitamin C kills cancer cells?
There's a couple different theories. So let's go back to Dr. Riordan's research. And as you're aware, Linus Pauling and Ewan Cameron published their research with a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. And around the world, there was a sense of hope surrounding it. And then Mayo Clinic replicated it, which of course replication means that you do exactly what the other researchers did. Well, they did not give the vitamin C IV. They gave it only orally, and we think they only gave it in one single dose a day, 10 grams. And of course, that's going to make people have an upset stomach, and it's, you know, just to suddenly give people 10 grams is not a good way to do it. They should have at least done it the way that Cathcart did it, but to my knowledge, they did not. Anyway, they showed no results. There was a second study done because Pauling wrote a number of little rebuttals regarding their research, and one of the things he said is that cancer patients who have had a lot of chemotherapy, their immune system's all beat up, they're depleted, they're tired, they're cachectic, they're in a state of acidosis, which I can come back to and explain this how vitamin C helps that. But anyway, so they did do a repeat study where they did cancer patients who did nothing else but the 10 grams of vitamin C. But once again, they didn't give any IV. They only gave it orally, and once again, they got no results. Well, when Mayo published this, the oncology world basically said this is the final word, and evidently Linus Pauling, who's a 2-time Nobel Prize winner, doesn't know what he's talking about. Who really was in the hunt for the DNA, the structure of DNA, and there are a lot of people say that he was ahead of Crick and Watson, but they got the credit for it anyway. So anyway, Pauling was not off base. He just basically ran out of steam. He died very soon after that, and Dr. Riordan was a friend of his, and so he decided to pick up the flag and carry on. And in the initial research, he got $1 million grant. Fortunately, there were people here in Wichita that believed in Dr. Riordan and what he was saying. He used his grant to do studies, and he found that when you grow any type of cancer cell in cell culture, and if you start adding vitamin C, it generates hydrogen peroxide. So the whole story about vitamin C, at least initially, is that vitamin C, which is an antioxidant, generates a pro-oxidant at higher doses. And that's For the viewers that are watching here, that is a key understanding. And as Dr. Levy says, that doesn't mean that vitamin C is a pro-oxidant. It's going to always be an antioxidant. But in the presence of iron or copper, the oxidized iron is reduced to the Fe2, and that then interacts with oxygen to generate hydrogen peroxide. And if you keep pumping the vitamin C in, it's kind of like a water wheel. As you continue to do that, not only are you generating more hydrogen peroxide, but there's a reaction that further occurs called the Fenton reaction, where you start generating the hydroxyl radical, which is the most powerful radical in the body, which is what the white blood cells use to fight infections. So Dr. Riordan's theory is that the vitamin C, if you got it to a critical dose, which is in the Riordan protocol is about 350 to 400 milligrams per deciliter, that if you got, which is about 20 millimolar, if you got to that dose, you could kill any cancer cell in vitro, in the Petri dish. That doesn't mean that it necessarily works at that level in vivo, but that's the dose that we shoot for, and most of the time that's sufficient. And that's where you hear people saying, well, I had to take 50 grams or 75 grams in order to get my blood level to a cancer-killing dose. It's based upon Dr. Riordan's research in culture media.
Will you elaborate further on the connection with iron and cancer? Doesn't cancer cells have an unhealthy relationship with iron? Do they not?
Yeah, any infection or any cancer, and the infectious cells, the cancer cells will take up large amounts of iron. And that's the theory that high-dose vitamin C, that's part of the way that it kills the cancer cells, is that it interacts with the iron and generates the hydrogen peroxide. And cancer cells are deficient in an enzyme called catalase. And so in humans, the healthy cells have catalase. So this is why high-dose vitamin C is good for your healthy cells, but it kills cancer cells. And this was the whole excitement and premise back in the 1990s when Dr. Riordan did what's called the RECNAC research. RECNAC is cancer spelled backwards, and his idea was he was going to reverse the trends in cancer with IV vitamin C. And so there are now new theories as to how cancer works, though. This is Dr. Cantley at Cornell has this theory I call it the Trojan horse theory. And this is where, indeed, when you put the vitamin C in high dosages, it does generate hydrogen peroxide extracellularly, the outside of the cell, in the interstitial compartment, and that hydrogen peroxide oxidizes a lot of this vitamin C that's remaining into dehydroascorbate. Now we're going to get a little technical, but dehydroascorbate is the oxidized form of vitamin C. And so it's the form that looks like sugar. And keep in mind, all your cancer patients who go in and get a PET scan, what they're giving is radioactive tagged sugar. And the reason that works is because cancer cells have upregulated their GLUT receptors, the glucose receptor transporters, and these are pulling in sugar like crazy, because we now know the Warburg effect is where Dr. Warburg in the 1950s, showed that if you deprive cells of oxygen, they will regress back to anaerobic fermentation, glycolysis, fermentation. And so this is what happens in advanced cancer patients. Their cells regress back, they're only burning sugar, and this is why advanced cancer patients crave sugar. This is exactly why you shouldn't eat sugar, is because those GLUT receptors want to just pull in the glucose. And it's a very inefficient. You only get 2 ATPs per molecule of glucose, whereas if you're going through the regular mitochondria, you get 38 ATPs. So that's the 19-fold increase in energy when you're burning sugar the proper way. Cancer patients are not. Cancer cells are not. And they become, as the cancer grows and it creates what's called this anaerobic fermentation. What do you get with fermentation? Lactic acid. They go into acidosis. So a cancer patient loses their appetite. The cancer more or less cannibalizes all their fat, all their reserve nutrients. They lose weight. They lose energy. They become very, very tired. They become gray. By the way, when people get an IVC, that gray look goes away in 1 or 2 treatments. So it starts to work very quickly. They get their appetite back. There's now 12 quality of life studies supporting IV vitamin C in advanced cancer care. So there's no reason in the world why people shouldn't be getting it, even if they're getting full-bore chemo. There's no chemo that has been shown to be interfered with by vitamin C. It actually, the ones that have been studied, they tend to work synergistically, and you can use lower doses of the chemo with less side effects. So really, all of this points to the fact that vitamin C is an ideal adjunctive therapy for cancer cell patients.
So you made me think about, when we were talking about hydrogen peroxide, that's also a therapy used for cancer in some clinics, right? What's your opinion on IV hydrogen peroxide or the oral hydrogen peroxide therapy?
Well, have you interviewed Frank Schallenberger, Dr. Schallenberger?
I know of him, but I have not interviewed him.
Yeah, so he is the president of the American Ozone Association. See, so really, in my opinion, the medicine of the future is redox medicine. And what we're talking about is reduction oxidation. And that is where the mitochondria use oxygen as the motive force to pull those electrons through the electron transport chain, and without going into a big discussion, generates ATP. And without ATP, nothing works. Without energy, everything stops. Hold your breath for longer than 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, you're dead, because all your mitochondria stop working without oxygen. So redox is simply the orderly transfer of electrons throughout the mitochondria, across cell membranes. All of the things that the cell does depends upon redox generation of energy. So oxygen is key. So ozone is basically O2, and we pass O2 through an electrical current, and it splits some of the O2s into O1, shall we say, and that combines with some of the other O2s, and so ozone gas is about 5% O3 and 95% O2. And that O3, as soon as you put it in the blood, it, boom, creates hydrogen peroxides, basically. It's liposides, basically, but it's similar to hydrogen peroxide. That's what's happening when you put hydrogen peroxide in the blood. So these tend to enhance the oxidation. Now this is where this gets too much chemistry, and I apologize to the listeners, but NADH is a key part of the mitochondria. That's what it's called, an electron carrier. But it doesn't work unless you can oxidize the NADH to NAD. So that ratio of NAD to NADH requires oxidation for it to work. And that's what ozone and peroxide provides. That's what aerobic exercise provides. That's what hyperbaric oxygen provides. So all the various oxygen therapies, even I tell people how you sleep and how you breathe at night is so crucial. If you're a mouth breather, you're not using oxygen efficiently. You should get the mouth tape and make sure your mouth is closed when you're sleeping. You don't have to go out and get CPAP. All you have to do is make sure your mouth is closed when you're sleeping at night. That alone would reduce the incidence of cancer in this country. It would reduce obesity, it would reduce diabetes, all these things.
Wow, just get some duct tape.
Don't use duct tape. I have no holdings in this company, but there's a nice little company that you can get on the internet called Somnifix.
Okay.
And Somnifix is a nice little, it's a clear plastic tape. It fits over your lips. And then in the morning when you take it off, it just comes off nice and smooth. You don't lose lip tissue like you do with a lot of the tapes. And so, but that's a good way to improve oxygen utilization, because while you're sleeping, you want your brain to be in full tilt, because you're doing a lot of brain cleaning there. Of course, your other tissues as well. If you've got good oxygenation, remember I said Warburg, he created cancer by depriving cells of oxygen. Chemicals and pollutants and carcinogens and cigarette smoking, it deprives cells of oxygen. Aerobic exercise gives oxygen to the cells. Good quality sleep gives oxygen.
So you're saying there's value to all of the oxygen therapies we've mentioned, hyperbaric, ozone therapy, even consuming hydrogen peroxide orally?
See, the problem is all of these are so ignored by conventional. See, the whole system is rigged. There's no real interest in basic science, and it's like, what's the next blockbuster drug?
$1 billion drug, yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of questions that still exist about hydrogen peroxide. I always tell people, be very careful, use low doses, take it on an empty stomach if you're going to take it. But yeah, it theoretically can be very beneficial.
That's fascinating. So you mentioned liposomal vitamin C earlier, and people have been asking me this for years. And, what do you think about liposomal? And my answer, my standard answer has been, well, I've seen lots of claims, but I actually haven't seen the research that proves that the absorption is increased. And then the other thing is it's more expensive. So some of these liposomal products are like $1 per 1,000 milligrams versus ascorbic acid is pennies. And so my default answer is like, well, I just don't know about it, but I do know that the pure ascorbic acid powder and those, and maybe different forms of ascorbate, which I'd like your opinion on too, have evidence behind them. But it sounds like there are studies that indicate that liposomal vitamin C does, in fact, increase absorption in the blood.
I agree with your basic point and we've done some liposomal studies here. We did show that it slightly did outperform regular vitamin C in terms of intracellular uptake. The whole theory of the liposome, it was invented by the cosmetic industry. It's basically an artificial cell where the inner part of the cell is the vitamin C. It's hydrophilic. It's a water soluble molecule. The outer part of the cell is like a cell membrane. It's phospholipids, and it's hydrophobic. And so it's like a cell membrane, and the vitamin C is in the nucleus. And because it's fat soluble, it'll go through the skin. By the same token, the upper stomach has some lymphatic, there's a lot of the immune system in the stomach. So if you can get and the intestines, if you can get the vitamin C to absorb in the upper stomach, it will go into the lymphatics, and it will circulate in the lymphatics longer than what it will in the blood. See, in the blood, once you get above about 0.07 millimolar, the kidneys just excrete it. And the excretion rate is, the half-life is 30 minutes. So after 2.5 hours, any vitamin C you've taken by mouth is out. Now, Dr. Steve Hickey, who has written extensively on vitamin C, says if you dose it frequently throughout the day, then you can maintain a higher blood level. And depending upon how much your body needs, how well you're absorbing it, liposomal vitamin C may stay in the lymphatics longer, and that's a good thing. And one quote, then I'll go ahead and, Levy and I talk a lot around the world, and everyone asks him, is Lipo-C as good as IV vitamin C? And he evidently made a quotation somewhere that everyone heard it, where he said, yeah, 4 or 5 packets is as good as 15 grams of IV vitamin C. That has been incorrectly interpreted. So the interpretation is, if you're getting a viral infection, it's hard to find a practitioner to give you an IV C on the spot, but you could take 5 packets of Lipo C and get a rapid enough rise in your lymphatic levels of vitamin C that you could probably knock the cold out before it became established. So he says that makes it maybe superior to IV vitamin C. But the IV vitamin C will always give you much higher blood levels.
And the 4 to 5 packets, would that be at once?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on how sick you are and how quickly that works. I would do other things. I would have people take 50,000 of vitamin D. There's a bunch of things you could do if you're starting to get a cold, but vitamin C would be one of the things that you would do.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. Are there any particular liposomal brands or ascorbic acid brands that you like or recommend?
We sell Live On Lab here, but we don't really. There's a lot of companies now coming out with it. It is very much easier. A lot of people get upset stomach. You don't get upset stomach. I've several times I've taken 30 grams of liposomal C in a half-hour period of time with no diarrhea, no upset stomach. I couldn't do that with regular vitamin C. Now, sodium ascorbate, just to get back to what you had said earlier, sodium ascorbate is my preferred buffered vitamin C. There's a bunch of other ones, but I think the least expensive and the best one is sodium ascorbate, because you can stir that into water. It's easy to drink. Still, there are some people that they'll get diarrhea with it, but generally speaking, it's better absorbed than ascorbic acid, and they won't get an upset stomach from it.
And the excess sodium it's not an issue?
Very minimal, very minimal. The sodium, if they have congestive heart failure or they've got a water retention comorbidity, like we have patients that come in and they've got renal failure or they've got congestive heart failure, then we have to work around that, because even IV vitamin C has a pretty heavy sodium load. What I can say is that it has no chloride in it, so you won't get hypertension, you won't get other problems that you would get if you were just using a whole bunch of salt, meaning sodium chloride. So sodium ascorbate tends not to be a problem, other than can cause some fluid retention.
There's a product, I believe it's called Sufficient C. Does that ring a bell?
We sell that. We sell Sufficient C. It's basically sodium ascorbate, but it's got some nice flavorings in it. A lot of people judge everything by how well it tastes, and it does taste better.
Yeah, it tastes pretty. It's the best tasting vitamin C powder I've ever tried.
Yeah,
They sent me some.
We have Vitality C. We have a number of different types of vitamin C. We have standard vitamin C part, your sodium ascorbate. We've got them all here, because each one of them has different ways that you could make use of it, depending upon what your clinical situation was, or whether you were just wanting to do prevention or well-being. A lot of people take extra vitamin C just for a sense of well-being. It supports the adrenals. It helps you make good collagen. There's some research showing that it helps with endorphins, so your sense of well-being is better. It definitely relieves pain in cancer patients. There's actually 16 benefits, and I don't think I can just sit here and name them, but there are 16 benefits of taking high-dose vitamin C if you have cancer, and that's going to be in our new book.
Yeah, that's great. So what are some of the other therapies that you feel like are valuable and that are used in your clinic?
For cancer?
Yeah.
For cancer. Okay, so the second biggest thing that we do at the Riordan Clinic is that Dr. Riordan, the story of the Riordan Clinic is Olive W. Garvey, who was a wealthy benefactress in Wichita, took her grandchildren to the doctor because she had read a book about nutrition and mental illness, and she thought, well, I'm going to get my grandkids measured, get their nutrient levels measured, because she was in agriculture, and if the field isn't growing very well, the garden's not in good shape, get a soil analysis and get that soil balanced. And so when she took them to the doctor said, what are nutrient levels? And so she couldn't find anyone to do them. And so she, at that point in her, and this was back in the early 70s, 1970s, she said, we need a lab in Kansas that measures human nutrient levels. Enter Dr. Riordan, and those two got together, and he became the director. He ran her first lab. At that point in his career, psychotropic meds were coming on big, and he thought they were being overused, and that there were biological reasons why people get mental illness or become mentally ill, and so he wanted to do nutrient testing. So they've had a fit with each other, and so the Riordan Clinic came about as a nutrient testing lab. So if you came to me with cancer, Chris, I would encourage you to do a full inventory of the basic nutrients, your antioxidants, your B vitamins, your RBC mineral levels, your fatty acids, amino acids. I would look at your hormones. I would look at homocysteine, methylation factors. I would basically try to understand where are the chinks in your armor? Where are the low spots in your nutrient levels? And it's not that we throw a ton of supplements at people, but we're precisely trying to fill in the gaps, because nutrition is a team sport. And if you have a full inventory of nutrients, your chances are always going to be better. Now, you can do that by taking multivitamins. You can take multiple different types of nutrients, and you can accomplish some of the same thing. It's a shotgun approach. Dr. Riordan said that what we do is sharpshooting. It's more expensive, but it's nevertheless, it's worked well for us, because when people know they're low in something, they're much more motivated to keep taking it, and then we have them test back later to make sure that they have reached the target dose.
What are some key nutrients that you see people or cancer patients deficient in over and over? I'm gonna guess one, vitamin D.
Vitamin D. I happen to be on the Pure North Synergy Foundation board up in Calgary, and they've done almost 50 major studies now in the last 10 years on just how incredibly important vitamin D is. It's really not a vitamin. Once again, it's like vitamin C. Vitamin C is really not a vitamin. These are indigenous molecules that evolved with us, and that somehow humans lost the ability to make it, and we've survived anyway, mostly because of our mitochondria, and that's a whole other story. But vitamin D, we got it from the sun, or the Eskimos got it from the blubber. There was a lot of ways that we got vitamin D. We're not getting it now. If people are not taking it, they have a very low level, and they're opening themselves to a number of cancers. Obesity, diabetes, autoimmune disease, depression, osteoporosis. And so I remember Dr. Riordan and I were driving past a McDonald's. Nothing against, I'm not a big McDonald's fan, but I thought he was going to make a wisecrack about McDonald's. And what he actually said, he looked at me and he says, "Too bad we don't have a McPill." And vitamin D is such an easy thing to take. It's so inexpensive. So I usually say, just humor me and take this one thing. That's what I try to get people to take, is vitamin D. And that would solve a lot of the world's problems in terms of health. But the medical profession still, they're suspicious. They're reacting to the fact that vitamin D2 caused some problems with calcification. Vitamin D3 does not. You'd have to take a whole lot of vitamin D3 before you're going to get into problems. So vitamin D is a big one. Then it starts getting into, I'm really big on iodine. I think the most common cancers we see are breast cancer and prostate cancer. And my good friend David Brownstein has done a good job of showing me data on the benefits of iodine. I do a lot with thyroid care. Dr. Frank Schallenberger basically says if you've got cancer, make sure your thyroid's in good shape, because thyroid is a major regulator of the mitochondria and oxygen utilization. So we carefully check people's thyroids, and a lot of the conventional testing is not adequate. You can miss functional hypothyroidism. If your patients are listening and you're interested in the whole T3 thing, be sure you get a reverse T3 along with the free T3, because that reverse T3 can tell us if your body's not utilizing thyroid hormone properly. So that's a biggie. Of course, the minerals all come into play. Zinc is big. Magnesium is huge. You really got to have magnesium for proper methylation and ATP formation. Zinc for detoxification. So again, it depends on what you're low in. If you've got enough of those minerals, taking more isn't necessarily going to make you better.
What about pleural effusion or fluid retention? Does IV vitamin C therapy help with that? And
it really doesn't.
Okay.
Maybe if it's mild. There you basically have to have a thoracentesis. Usually the people that are dealing with that, they're pretty advanced. Now, I suppose, and I'm very much aware of all the coffee enemas and the various detox procedures, and I'm in favor of that. A lot of our patients get to us too late, and they're just about unable to do many of those things. Of course, we haven't even mentioned diet, the incredible importance of diet, and getting people off of sugar and thinking more in terms of high color, high phytonutrient foods.
Lots of veggies, some fruit.
Yeah.
Yep.
Watch the fruit, though. Watch the fruit. That's a pretty high source of fructose and sugar. So I'm not against fruit, obviously, but low glycemic fruit. Ketogenic, I'm a little bit. I'm not. I think I understand it technically that it'd be a good thing, and maybe in certain patients it'd be a good thing. And there is a book called The Keto Zone, which I think is a better way of approaching the ketogenic diet. But a lot of your cancer patients they just have a hard time with it because it's not necessarily a great diet to feel alive. One of the things that I find that our patients do the best with, having a reason to live. If you can, I'll tell you a really good story. Dr. Riordan had a nurse patient that survived breast cancer, and her name was Zelma. And so he knew her real well. She was kind of like a nurse crotchet, type of thing, really a little bit of a battle axe. Anyway, he would have a cancer patient come in, and after he finished his interview, he would give him a piece of paper with her number on it, and he says, "Would you just call Zella and just tell her that I had you call?" And so they say, "Why?" He said, "Well, just call her." So they would, when they get home, they would call her, and so she'd pick up the phone and say, "Yes, this is Zella," and they'd say, "Well, Dr. Riordan wanted me to call you, but we don't know why." And she said, "Well, do you have cancer?" And they'd say, well, yes. And she says, "Well, do you want to live or do you want to die?" And they'd say, "What?" And Dr. Riordan knew she was going to do this. She would cut through, everyone, normally people say, "Of course I want to live." But Dr. Riordan and her thinking was a lot of people have frustrating lives, and oftentimes cancer is triggered by stresses, losses, divorces, financial failures, other things happen in your life, and you become despondent, and boom, you get cancer. And then when you get cancer, no one's going to blame you if you die of cancer, because it's a very, very tough disease, unless you really want to live. And I'm sure you've heard hundreds of stories where I can't die because I've got to go to my granddaughter's graduation. I can't die because my son is getting married in 8 months, and I've got to be there. And more often than not, they are. They're there. And so there is some kind of something about the will to live that is, of course, man's search for meaning, Viktor Frankl. If people have that reason to live, that enlists some extremely powerful healing forces within the body. And so anyway, all these other things, vitamin C, and they're all great, and I think you need them. But if you don't have that will to live, nothing's going to work.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because you're right on. And I had someone ask me that. A practitioner asked me, "Do you want to live?" And no one had ever asked me that before. And this was, a couple months into my healing journey. And, I was taken aback by it, because for a moment, I had just sort of flashing. It's kind of like my life flashed before my eyes, and I thought, gosh, do I even want to live? Do I have a death wish? Am I secretly, right? Am I secretly And I also kind of, it was like I had all of this awareness all at once, but I knew that I was very unhappy and insecure, and it was really didn't like myself. And all of these things sort of just were like circulating in my mind in that instant. But then I also realized, you know what, I have a choice, and I can choose to live, right?
Very powerful. It's a fundamental choice. There are choices, but this is one of the most fundamental choices you can make, is the desire to live at all costs. Now, I do have patients that I believe them, they're earnest, and they do die. We all do. We all
I understand.
do. But I'm going to say, if you can make that choice at the right time, you can add time, quality time to your life. And that's basically what I think health is all about, is making choices in favor of quality. And I'm going to say that the essence of spirituality is quality. Now, quality is different for everyone, and there's different reasons why we experience quality. But unless we go out and create and grab quality, it's not a passive thing. It doesn't just come to you. You have to go get it, especially when you've got a life-threatening illness. Then you've got every reason in the world to give up, and certainly with all the pain, the fatigue, the loss of appetite. The other thing is, a lot of cancer patients become horribly alienated. Do you remember anti-cancer, Dr. David Servan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Survivor?
Yeah,
he said once he was a doctor, he was an MD doctor, and he said he couldn't believe how all of his friends, all the doctor friends that he was associated with, once they knew he had cancer, it's kind of like he became an untouchable. And that's another thing that cancer patients need to know about, is there's so much fear and superstition surrounding cancer that they feel alienated. They feel like an alien.
Yeah.
And so
I felt that way for sure. And you know, everybody knows cancer isn't contagious, but they still tend to treat you as if it is. And of course, the isolation is compounded when you choose alternative therapies. Then everybody really scatters.
that's the other thing I was going to bring up. We were talking earlier about some of the factors that make it hard to get IV vitamin C. One of the biggest factors is the cancer patient's family, because my wife has had breast cancer. Fortunately, it was 17 years ago, and we did a number of things, including IV vitamin C, and she's a robust survivor to this day. But it wasn't easy, because her sister and brother-in-law were very high up at Hartford Hospital back east, and it was a bit of a tug of war about what needed to be done. And because she was their relative, and it's interesting, blood is a little bit thicker than marriage almost. At least a lot of people think it is. And so it was almost, they felt like they had more say-so than I did, or that even she did, that they knew better for her. The good news was we found a middle ground. She ended up having radiation therapy. She had a lumpectomy. She was an early stage breast cancer. She had a lumpectomy. She did not do chemo, but she went ahead and did radiation, which she now wishes she wouldn't have done because she has complications. But at the time, we were able to move forward, and I did the IV vitamin C at home with her 2 or 3 nights a week. The funny story there is our kids, 2 of them are doctors, but to this day, they thought that all tired mothers, when they came home, my wife is a teacher, when they came home from school, when she came home from school, she would make supper, and then she would sit down in the chair, and I would start the IV. And they thought all mothers got an IV at night just to recover from the day. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea for a lot of housewives.
Like a Myers cocktail.
Yeah, jumpstart them.
Do you do any other IV therapies?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we do.
What else?
We do Myers. We do one of the ones that we've had really good success with is ultraviolet blood irradiation. Ultraviolet blood irradiation may be unfamiliar to some of your viewers, but it was actually big in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And it looked like it was going to be what antibiotics became. Because what the UBI is where you take about 60 cc blood sample, put it up into 250 of saline, and then we inject ozone into it. So that's what I call the first kill, because ozone is almost like peroxide. It will kill germs. But then we drip that through a ultraviolet light box, a very intense ultraviolet light box, and that kills whatever microbes are left in the blood sample. And then we route that right back into their vein. And if you think about it, what we've done is we've created a natural antigen, a weakened whatever microbes were in the blood specimen. The ozone and the ultraviolet light kills them, and as they break apart, that becomes kind of like a personalized vaccination for that patient. Whatever infection they've got, they are now they have the antigens. It's been rendered harmless, and so their immune system can recognize it and then go searching throughout the body for wherever the rest of the infection is. And so it's a way of activating. Now, what we do that first in the morning, oftentimes, and we'll do the IVC in the afternoon, just as a way of kind of activating their immune response.
Did Riordan ever do Laetrile?
It's illegal in the United States, and so he didn't. We know of some clinics that got shut down because of it. Now, there are some clinics that do give the patients numbers in Mexico to where they can get it and add it to their own IV.
Right
now, there's a big saline and even an IV bag shortage, and we're in there are a lot of clinics like us are kind of in trouble because we can't get the level of vitamin C, the medium, the fluid. And so we used to ship, people we could ship vitamin C to their home, and they would get nurses to give it to them at their home. We can't even do that right now because we don't even have enough to go around. We're down to several weeks of saline. We're hoping that this crisis is alleviated. I've got some ideas for how to continue IVC, but
what's causing it? I mean, is it increased demand or something else?
The big thing is the Hurricane Maria knocked out the big plant in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
But you think, oh my gosh, they should be able to authorize some plants somewhere else or something. But there are people that are concerned, that it may be an artificial shortage. You just don't know what powers there are that are trying to control stuff like this. So, but anyway, we're having a heck of a hard time getting saline and sterile water, which you'd think that shouldn't be that hard to make, but they've got very stringent restrictions and qualifications for what they consider to be medically okay. So that's our biggest problem right now, not the IVC itself. The IVC itself is on the rise because it's being used now. There are going to be 20 hospitals in the Johns Hopkins study on sepsis and IV vitamin C, and then there's Harvard and Beth Israel is getting into it. They're going to be doing a double-blind study, and then there's a study in New York that's going to be involved in it. So the good news there is that we're having our conference. We have every 2 years we have a conference on IV vitamin C. So in October we're having our 6th IVC symposium, and Dr. Barry Fowler is going to be one of our speakers. Dr. Barry Fowler, I heard him speak at the KU Med School in Kansas City on vitamin C. He actually created the protocol that Dr. Merrick, who's gotten a lot of the media attention, uses. Dr. Fowler did it at his hospital. He's a surgeon. He works the intensive care unit. He did a double-blind study. His study was better controlled, and if they would have latched onto him, they're giving Merrick a hard time because his study wasn't blinded. But Fowler's was, and he showed efficacy at the same dosages, roughly the same dosages that Merrick is using. But he's excited because about 4 weeks into the study, now this is where a patient comes into the intensive care unit, they're dying of septic shock. And so what they do is they call down to the pharmacy, they're enrolled in the study, and the pharmacist sends up the bags of fluid, and the nurses don't know whether it's the placebo or the vitamin C. But what Fowler said is after about 3 weeks, 4 weeks of the study going on, and they're working with patients, he said after about that period of time where the nurses got to see how rapidly patients recovered who got the vitamin C, they would come up to him and say, we know who's getting vitamin C, because their blood pressure immediately comes up. They start waking up. They're feeling better. They start eating right away. So anyway, this is why Dr. Levy is very hopeful that once a large number of conventional institutions begin to use vitamin C, that if not the doctors, the nursing staff is going to recognize that this is a powerful therapy that could benefit so many chronic illnesses. It's not just a cancer therapy. Any infectious disease, any psychiatric syndrome, any autoimmune disease, just about any, even like the story that goes with Dr. Riordan, he had a big spider bite. And when he measured his vitamin C level, it was like nil. And so he gave himself 15 grams, which was not that much, but at that time, that's what he was using, was just a low dose, because he really didn't know what the safe dose was at that time. And it didn't stop the infection, and his blood levels stayed low. So it's like the infection absorbed the vitamin C. So he had to do 2 or 3 IVCs over 3 days, and then it cleared up. So it was then that he realized this therapy is a very powerful healing factor. And he began using it for anyone that's, like adrenal fatigue, autoimmune disorders, shingles. It works really well for shingles. So it's basically giving back a healing modality that the animal world has, that we humans and guinea pigs and some primates have lost.
I've got one more question for you. Thank you so much for your time. You mentioned in the very early in our conversation, you were talking about Riordan and mental illness. Did he make some discoveries back then about causes of mental illness related to nutrient deficiencies, and did he have any success reversing them with?
Yeah, he was his mentor was Dr. Carl Pfeiffer, who had the BioBrain Center in New Jersey. And Pfeiffer was a MD, PhD pharmacist. And he had discovered that most of the schizophrenics, he was mostly working with schizophrenia, had an imbalance in histamine. And there were the high histamine schizophrenics and the low histamine schizophrenics. There were some other ones. He had about 5 categories, but those were the 2 major ones. And so Dr. Riordan studied under him, and this is another reason why he wanted to get a laboratory. He wanted to start measuring histamine and pyrols and some of these things. So there was the high pyrrole excretors, and these are people that are low on B6 and zinc. But what we found out about the high histamine and the low histamine, it was really another doctor that discovered that really what we were talking about was methylation. And so I don't know if you guys have gotten into methylation, but people who are undermethylated have a high histamine, and people that are overmethylated have a low histamine. And the methyl groups are crucial in terms of making your neurotransmitters. You take tyrosine and methylate it, and you've got dopamine. I think phenylalanine is an intermediate, but then you have dopamine, and you methylate dopamine, you have norepi, and you methylate norepi, and you have epinephrine, adrenaline. And then if you oxidize adrenaline, you have adrenochrome, which was Dr. Hoffer found was another major factor in schizophrenia, and he found that niacin neutralized adrenochrome. Also turns out that niacin is very important for making NAD, which I was telling you earlier is a very important electron transport molecule. And if you don't have adequate NAD, you cannot make adequate ATP. What organ in the body uses or makes the most ATP? The brain, the frontal lobe. 20,000 mitochondria, 10 to 20,000 mitochondria in the brain cells of the frontal lobe. 5 to 10,000 in the heart. So the brain is actually using more energy than the heart is, and the heart beats 80,000 times a day. So that tells you For our brains to keep working, we need a lot of ATP. And for that to work, you need NAD, which you make from niacin. Now, the thing where vitamin C came in, Hoffer found that the people who were taking their adrenaline, when they were stressed and they were making more adrenaline, they were oxidizing the adrenaline to adrenochrome. And adrenochrome has a similar structure to LSD.
Wow. Right.
So Abram Hoffer was the first doctor to, what did Timothy Leary call it? Psychedelic.
Yeah.
Psychedelics. Dr. Hoffer was doing research on psychedelics because psychedelics mimic schizophrenia, certain types of schizophrenia. Well, that's due to oxidized adrenaline. Vitamin C is a very powerful antioxidant, so he would have his schizophrenics take large doses of vitamin C, and that would reduce back the adrenaline back to real adrenaline and not this oxidized form that was causing these hallucinations and stuff in schizophrenia. So to this day, we'll see schizophrenics, we put them on vitamin C, we test them for methylation, we get their methylation balance, we usually use some form of niacin with them, but that unfortunately has been lost, so there's not a lot of doctors doing orthomolecular psychiatry. The great ones have all died. So we continue doing it here, but the psychotropic med approach has been so dominant, and so hopefully there'll be a reawakening where people realize, because what people don't know is since the advent of psychotropic meds, the incidence of disability, mental disability from mental illness has grown in the United States almost tenfold. So if you get on a psychotropic medicine, you may not be flagrantly schizophrenic, but you'll never go back to work.
Man, that's fascinating.
So I hated to get off on that little tangent, but you know, that's where this whole field of nutritional functional medicine, by the way, the Riordan Clinic was called, back in its founding in 1975, the Center for the Improvement of Human Functioning. And the first conference was called the Human Functioning Conference. And one of the early presenters was Jeffrey Bland, the leader of functional medicine.
Yeah.
I'm sad for Dr. Bland, though. I never blame him because, by gosh, he has created a tremendous organization under functional medicine. But he kind of got part of his start. He was also just brilliant to begin with. But he was one of the early speakers at Dr. Riordan's Functional Medicine
40
Conference.
years ago, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. A little more than that. Incredible. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time and wisdom and expertise. I mean, this has just been fascinating, mind-blowing. I'm so excited to get this out. And thank you so much for your work. And it really, I mean, I know maybe it didn't feel like it, but I imagine it took a lot of courage to walk away from conventional medical practice and do what you do.
At the time it did, though, I knew a part of me knew that if I didn't do it, I was going to die, not physically die, but you know how if you don't really follow that voice inside of you, you're betraying yourself. Yeah. And that's not good. And so to thine own self be true. So, hey, no, I'm 67, but I'm planning to stay involved because it's too exciting. There's just so many things happening now. Finally, after all these years, people like you, thank you, by the way, for all you have done to kind of get people thinking along these lines, because you've got people get into this trance when they hear that, that's got to be worst 3 words you can hear. You've got cancer, okay? And people get into this like frozen state. It's a state of stress where they're paralyzed. They've got to break out of that and say, okay, what else can I do? And anything is better than nothing. But and also they're so afraid. Whatever the doctor says, okay, let's do that. And I think what your site has done is gotten people to stand up for themselves as true co-learners. Co-learners is the term that Dr. Riordan liked. And if people can be a co-learner, I think they've got a much better chance of surviving the cancer.
Thank you. That really means a lot to hear you say that about what I do. And yeah, at the end of the day, I'm really just trying to give people hope and inspiration and information that they can use to help themselves. And, I'm not telling them to give their doctor the finger. I'm just saying, listen, like I said earlier, there's so much you can do to help yourself. And let me show you. Let's get all these people together who've healed cancer and learn from each other, because that's really how we learn. We learn from each other. So thank you so much again.
Okay,
thank you,
Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being so generous with your time. Hey, everybody, thanks for watching. Please share this, like it, share it, whatever. Help spread the word about this amazing research, about Dr. Ron, about the Riordan Clinic, and about the power of vitamin C. And I'll see you all real soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.